Some stories break you, some heal you. But here at My 90s Love Story, we're here to fill your heart. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. From the time we were children, Ryder Sterling loathed me. But fate doesn't care what a boy wants. And fate had already decided he would marry me. To make his feelings clear, he abandoned me at our own wedding and went off to race cars in the street. After we were married, he did one insane thing after another, and I became the joke of high society. He was cruel about it. He treated my humiliation like a show he'd paid to watch, and more than once he dared me to go find another man, told me I'd only have myself to blame. Everyone believed I would be chained to Ryder for the rest of my life. For a long time, so did I. Then, on the 5th anniversary of our wedding, I handed him a set of divorce papers and smiled and told him, "At last, I can be rid of you." That night, he lost his mind and tore our wedding home apart with his bare hands. But let me start where the world got its favorite photograph of us. It happened on the yacht, at the most talked-about party of the season. Ryder was sprawled across a long lounge chair, lazy as a cat in the sun, and a girl with a bright, innocent face was perched sideways on his lap, her arms wrapped around his neck. A ring of young men and women stood around them, lifting glasses of champagne, chanting for him to kiss her, the chant rolling on and on. The girl's cheeks were flushed, her eyes shining and unfocused, as if she were half in love already. Ryder narrowed his eyes and let his gaze drift lazily across the crowd. "Don't make a scene," he drawled, smiling. "My wife is watching." Every head in the crowd turned at once. When they saw me, they went silent, and one after another they mumbled an awkward, "Sister-in-law?" The girl on his lap glanced my way and made no move to get down. If anything, she got bolder, tightening her hold on him, murmuring that she wanted to try something more exciting. The air went taut with anticipation. Everyone there was eager for the show. Everyone knew the Sterling marriage was a marriage in name only. Ryder flaunted his affairs in the open. There was always a woman on his arm, and not one of them was the least bit afraid of the woman who carried his name. I said nothing. I only looked straight at him and spoke, flat and cold. "The press is already waiting at the harbor for you to dock. Come back with me." The corner of Ryder's mouth curled up, mocking. The girl saw that he wasn't moving and pressed her advantage, sinking deeper into his lap, staring at me with open challenge in her eyes. Out on the water, the lights glittered, and a speedboat came tearing toward us. Then came the wall of lenses, the frantic clicking of shutters, the flashes stabbing at my eyes. I clenched my hands until my nails scraped my palms raw, caught on camera again. And I knew exactly what kind of storm was waiting for me on the other side of those photographs. Ryder's voice reached me, taunting. "All right then, Mrs. Sterling." He stood up without warning. The girl in his lap, unprepared, tumbled to the deck. "Young master," she whimpered. He didn't spare her a glance. He walked over to me, slid an arm around my waist, bent his head, and lowered his voice. "Let's go home." I could see the malice sitting bright and clear in his eyes. He didn't love that girl. There wasn't a shred of tenderness in him for her. He'd simply arranged on purpose for the reporters to get those pictures, because he knew perfectly well that whenever he had a scandal, the one who was punished for it would be me. And he played that cruel little game over and over, and he never once grew tired of it. My face didn't change. I took the hand at my waist and lifted it away. "Come on." Ryder let out a short, mocking laugh. I acted as if I hadn't heard it and pulled him onto the speedboat. In front of outsiders, I was and would always be the gentle, gracious Mrs. Sterling. This marriage was not a thing anyone was allowed to defy. Only when we docked and gotten into the car did I let go of his hand. He caught it right back, threaded his 10 fingers through mine, and locked them there. "Show a little respect," he said, his voice all mockery. "If you're going to put on a play, at least play your part all the way through." I drew my brows together, turned my face to the window, and let him do as he liked. We reached the gates of the house. The moment we stepped into the front hall, he crowded in on me, lifting our clasped hands high and pinning my back flat against the wall. His body was tall and heavy with threat, and I was trapped inside the narrow cage of his arms. In the dim light, I could see the pleasure kindling in his eyes. I let out a tired little breath. "Ryder, I'm a bit worn out tonight." Before I could finish, he dipped his head and bit down on my collarbone like a punishment. He laughed softly, contempt in his voice. "Do your duty as a wife, Mrs. Sterling. Cooperate." I had never once had the right to refuse. That name, Mrs. Sterling, kept falling from his mouth again and again, like a reminder meant to burn my place in the world into me. I had put on these chains of my own free will, and so I had no right to ask him to stop. He simply enjoyed tormenting me where everyone could see. Ryder never seemed to run out of energy. Even when he didn't sleep until the small hours, he still woke early, the way he always did. The bed beside me was empty. We were husband and wife, and we had never once woken up together. He'd told me so himself, without a hint of shame. "I don't want your face to be the first thing I see when I open my eyes. It would ruin my whole day." I lay there staring at the ceiling for a few minutes, then picked up my phone. Sure enough, last night's news had already climbed to the top of the trending list, all in the space of a few minutes. In the picture, the girl was sitting on Ryder's lap, and I stood below them, watching. The comments were lively. "The young master really knows how to play," one said. "Landed a mistress and a wife for a screen at the same time." "He's a real man," wrote another. "I'm sobbing. Went out to have fun and left his wife at home." Someone else. "You people who worship him like he's some devoted heartthrob. Wake up! Wake up!" Then the pity ones. "Don't you feel sorry for the wife? That photo hurts to look at." And then the ones who tore into me. "Serves her right. He didn't even want to marry her, and she's the one clinging on with a thick skin. Not a scrap of self-respect. Can't even get herself divorced. Pathetic. The funniest part is she used to act like the well-bred, cultured young lady. She should be dying of shame." Then one lone voice trying to be fair. "The man's the one flaunting it, and you're all cursing the woman?" Honestly, every marriage between these families has its own calculations. We're just watching. As long as we know how it really works, that's enough. The crowd of onlookers bickered on. I was used to all of it. I was about to close the page when the trending topic simply vanished in the blink of an eye. The Sterling Public Relations team had done its work. By the time I'd finished my morning run, Ryder was up. He leaned against the bar with a cup of coffee, his robe hanging open to show the hard line of his chest, his eyes half lowered as he looked at me. His mouth tilted lazily. "So Mrs. Sterling has good stamina after all. In that case, about last night." I knew nothing decent would come out of his mouth, so I cut him off, cold and even. "We leave in 30 minutes. The Sterlings placed a heavy value on family tradition. There was a rule, strict as a decree of thunder. No matter how busy anyone was, every Sunday, everyone came home. Even a reckless man like Ryder had never dared to break it. He narrowed his eyes, and the look in them was full of meaning. "Good luck, then." I understood exactly what he meant. Without a word, I went upstairs, washed, and changed. The whole way to the old house, Ryder kept his head bent over his phone. I sat in silence, watching the world slide past the window, bracing myself to walk straight into the storm. The moment the car reached the villa gates, he slipped the phone away and got out, not bothering to keep up any pretense, and walked into the main hall alone, leaving me to follow behind. Inside, he slouched down onto the sofa and couldn't be troubled to stand back up. Whatever he said, it made his grandmother laugh brightly. "Grandma," I greeted her politely. The old woman nodded, her voice warm. "Your father and mother are waiting in the study. Go and see them." "Yes." I knew perfectly well what they wanted to talk about, and the one who had caused all of it went on smiling, that cold little smile, not so much as lifting his eyes. When I came out of the study, there was a bright red handprint stamped across my face and a thread of blood at the corner of my lip. Ryder's mother had always been famous for her elegance. When she raised her hand, she always went for the face, and once she'd struck, she instantly recovered every ounce of her graceful poise. Every word out of her mouth was proud and full of scorn. Audrey, you have disappointed me beyond words. A grown woman who can't even hold on to her own husband's heart and then joins him in his madness. What sort of behavior is that? I have run out of patience with you. Standing outside the study door, I'd heard the tail end of what came before. The scolding hadn't been coming from Ryder's father. In the end, he had said, "You tell me. Our son is the one who does these rotten things. Why lay all of it on that girl's head?" "Who else should it fall on?" she'd answered coldly. Before the wedding, Ryder had a stubborn streak, but he never once did anything truly outrageous. She blamed us. We forced him to marry a girl he doesn't love. Of course he's miserable. Ryder's father sighed. The betrothal was arranged by his grandfather, between the two families. I had no way out of it. No way out? Then find one. Are we to just let the boy be shackled his whole life to a girl he doesn't love? Her voice broke. Tears rose in it. I only want him to be happy. I never dreamed he'd end up chained down like this by her. I turned and walked away, down the long hallway, and out of nowhere I thought of Ryder, and the sting at my lips seemed to spread all the way down into my heart, into a place I couldn't put a name to. I only knew it caught there and wouldn't loosen. At the end of the corridor, a window stood wide open, and Ryder was leaning against the sill, arms crossed, a half-burned cigarette pinched between his fingers. Beyond the glass, branches swayed in the spring light, and his face was lost in the play of shadow and glare. I was about to slip quietly past him when he caught my wrist. The finger holding the cigarette grazed the corner of my mouth, and a low laugh scraped out of his throat. Tsk. They really did it this time. The smoke stung, and my eyes went red. I turned my face aside from his hand. Ryder lifted the cigarette to his lips, his long, narrow eyes fixed on me, half a smile there and half not, the chill in his gaze not hidden at all. "Audrey Delaney, do you even know what it means to fight back?" His voice was low and lazy, threaded with a cruelty I couldn't quite read. I laughed along with him. "Do I have the right to fight back?" Ryder didn't answer. He waited until the cigarette had burned all the way down, then crushed it out in the ashtray on the sill. "No, of course you don't," he said mildly, and inside that mildness was a cold, cold blade. "You chose the wrong man, so you'll just have to bear it." And he walked away without another word. There was no doubt left. The whole Sterling family had laid every fault at my feet. Under the banner of teaching a wife her place, what they were really doing was humiliating me, arrogantly, thoroughly, inside and out. I didn't fight back, and I didn't grovel. I only carried it, quietly. Some debts have to be paid down to the last coin, and some people, in this life, you simply never see again. When I left the Sterlings that day, I told the driver, as I always did, to take me to the nursing home. Halfway there, the home called me. "Mrs. Sterling, your mother isn't doing well. Please come as quickly as you can." I gripped the phone, and my heart dropped like a stone. I rushed straight into the ward, and the sight of the thin, wasted woman lying in the bed stung my eyes until I could hardly bear it. Only a few days ago, I thought she was starting to turn a corner. The nurse couldn't meet my eyes. "Since your last visit, we weren't watching closely enough. She saw the news online. For all these years, even though Ryder had once driven a knife straight through my heart. Every single time his name came up in front of my mother, she still blushed like a girl in the middle of her first love. So I had always played the part for her, the part of a good, gentle, happy daughter. "There's my good girl." She struggled to lift her hand. I took her thin fingers in mine and choked before I could get a single word out. "Mom?" She patted the back of my hand softly, her clouded eyes brimming. "I've regretted it so much forcing you back then. I saw the two of you, you and that boy, childhood sweethearts, and I saw how much you loved him. I only thought I was choosing the very best place to leave you." Her breath started to come fast and shallow. I wiped her tears and gentled my voice. "Mom, that's all in the past. Don't talk about it anymore." But the more I wiped, the more her tears came. "The Sterlings never wanted this marriage. Ryder doesn't feel a thing for you. Living in that house, you must be so unhappy." "No." I curled my lips into a smile. "As the young Mrs. Sterling, I have a name and a place and an easy life." She looked at me for a long time, then couldn't help turning her face away. "My girl, I'm sorry." The silence pressed down until it was hard to breathe. After a long while, she asked me, hesitant and small, Could you let Ryder come and see me just once?" It was like a needle straight through my heart, and the dull ache spread out across my whole chest. "Of course," I said. I went to the door and called Ryder. I called and called, the phone rang, and no one picked up. I called his office directly. His secretary told me that after President Sterling left home, he'd gone abroad on business, to Africa, and his flight still hadn't landed. "What did he go there to do?" I asked. Word is, he went hunting." I held the phone and said nothing for a long, long time. My mother drifted in and out of consciousness, and each time she surfaced, she'd murmur, "Where's Ryder?" So I threw everything aside and called again, and sent one message after another. The spring nights are longer than the days. I never got him to come. In the cold heart of a spring night, I lost my mother forever. Because I was the young Mrs. Sterling. The Delaney family held a grand and splendid funeral for her. It was only after the whole ceremony was over that Ryder finally called back. I didn't answer. I let the phone ring itself out, over and over. The next day, I went back to the Delaney house to quietly sort through my mother's things. After so many years of illness, her room had gathered a thick coat of dust. Everything was old and long untouched. At dusk, the door pushed open, and someone stood there without speaking for a long moment. I didn't turn around. "Ryder, I don't want to see you right now." The person behind me said nothing. He stood there a while longer, then turned and left. I'd nearly finished with my mother's things. In the end, I took only one heavy photo album with me. As I passed through the living room, I found the Delaney family gathered around a boy of about 10, everyone doting and cheerful. When they saw me standing at the top of the stairs, the smiles vanished at once, and an awkward stiffness fell over them. My father waved his hand, and the beautiful woman beside him quickly pulled the child away. He gestured at the table, already laid for a meal. "Stay and eat before you go." "There's no need." I looked at him quietly, and it was as if in that one short moment, every ounce of resentment inside me had burned away to nothing. "Dad," I said gently, "this is probably the last time I'll call you that." His face darkened on the spot. "What did you say?" I didn't answer him. I only laughed. "I don't owe the Delaney family anything anymore." He was so used to my meekness, to my obedience, that this sudden distance was more than he could accept. "You mean to cut ties with the Delaney family?" "Yes." My voice was ice. "Audrey Delaney!" He shook with rage, snatched up the ashtray and hurled it. There was a scream of wind behind me, and my vision went dark. But before I could even react, someone caught me and pulled me hard against their chest, and the ashtray struck their shoulder with a heavy, dull sound. I looked up, startled, and met the dark, storm-deep eyes of Ryder. Ryder, my father, the one who'd thrown it, was so frightened he lost his voice. Ryder didn't so much as glance at him. He simply took my hand and led me out, and he didn't hesitate for a second. In the car, neither of us spoke. The streetlights streamed past the glass, weaving light and dark together, and in that long silence, Ryder took out a cigarette and set it between his lips. The lighter clicked open, but the cigarette never caught. He lowered his eyes, and his voice came out rough. "I'm sorry I still hadn't turned my phone on earlier." In 5 years of marriage, it was the first time Ryder had ever said sorry and meant it. Every time before, when he said the word, his tone had been mocking, without an ounce of sincerity, only ever meant to needle me. He was a rich man's son who roamed the African grasslands and lived by pure instinct, a man whose life was crowded with color. How could an ordinary girl ever squeeze her way into it? By the script I live by, I should have forced a small smile and said, "I understand." But right then my heart was in chaos, and for the first time I was afraid to let myself trust him. I didn't want to answer a single thing he said. Ryder's brows drew tight. The cigarette stayed at his lips, unlit, and at last he pulled it away and crushed it in his fist. He used so much force that his knuckles went white. "Audrey Delaney, do you want—" The phone rang, cutting straight across his words. For some reason, the anger in him flared up with nowhere to go. He took the call in a fury. "Damn it, are you out of your mind?" The car was small, and his voice carried, and so did the voice on the other end. It was a woman, clear and bright, with a coaxing, sulky edge to it. Ryder. She wasn't the least bit afraid of him. She sounded wounded and cross, like she was pouting. "You just left me stranded in Africa, is that it?" Ryder's brow rose, impatient. "Serves you right." "Ryder, you have no conscience," the girl accused hotly. "I don't care. You come back and get me right now." "You've got some nerve." He gave a cold laugh. "Try me, and see if I don't leave you there for good." She still wouldn't let it drop. "If I make a scene in front of your wife, don't say I didn't warn you." At that, his eyes narrowed. The smile stayed on his mouth, but a chill spread across the whole of his face. His voice was lazy and full of warning. All right, then. She clearly hadn't read him right. Her nerve dropped away a few notches at once. "I wasn't threatening you, it's just—" Ryder shoved the car door open and stepped out at his own leisure, wedging the phone between his shoulder and his neck, lighting a cigarette as he walked. The girl's voice faded away into the wind coming through the door he'd left open. Then Bethany, my assistant, called. "Vice President Delaney, President Sterling is trending again." I didn't even need to hear the rest to know what had happened. He'd been in Africa more than 10 days with that girl glued to his side the whole time. A scandal was hardly a surprise. I opened the page, and the picture hit me square in the eye. Ryder toying with a hunting rifle, and beside him a hot brazen girl clinging to his arm, leaning intimately into him. I recognized her. It was Sienna Rhodes, the famous socialite, wild and free and dazzling as fire. She suited Ryder perfectly. I had met Sienna Rhodes twice before. The first time was in London, when I was still a student and had crossed 10,000 miles to find him. One night Ryder had drunk too much, and, half in a haze, he'd pressed me up against a floor-to-ceiling window. "Ever been kissed?" He was grinning, a rogue's grin, coaxing me a step at a time. "Loosen up. Part your lips." One dodged him clumsily, and it only made him more delighted, as if he'd found himself a strange new toy. His eyes went darker and darker, and the kiss slipped past his control. And right at the moment when the wanting in him was about to boil over, a girl in heavy makeup and a short skirt burst in. She cried out in shock. "Ryder, what do you think you're doing?" Ryder didn't so much as pause. He gave a mocking smile. Just teaching my fiancé how to kiss, that's all. The girl looked at him, then at me, like a small wounded animal. She snatched a bottle of hard liquor off the bar and smashed it against the floor, then glared at Ryder with tears standing in her eyes. "You bastard!" And she stormed out and slammed the door behind her. Through the whole thing, Ryder had watched like a man taking in a show from the front row, calmly drawing out a cigarette and lighting it. When it was over, the room fell quiet. It struck me suddenly that she could come and go from Ryder's apartment as she pleased. The warmth of his kiss was still on my lips when I asked softly, "Do you like her?" Ryder tilted his head and gave a thin, cold smile. "Are you trying to keep tabs on me?" I pressed my lips together, not knowing what to say, and seeing me flounder, his smile turned crueler. "Audrey Delaney, if you want to go on being a person, then don't be so greedy with me." There had never been any real feeling between us. It was nothing but a naked contract of mutual interest. And here I was, wanting the power that came with being Mrs. Sterling, and love and faithfulness on top of it all. Too greedy. I lowered my head and said nothing, and I didn't argue. The second time I met Sienna Rhodes was at my own wedding, mine and Ryder's. That day, Ryder abandoned me and all our guests and walked out of the banquet hall. I ran after him to hold him back. Outside stood a fleet of extravagant cars, a pack of rich young men waiting, all of it crackling with bravado. Ryder shrugged off his suit jacket and pulled loose his tie and tossed them, careless, into my arms. His mouth curved into a mocking smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Sterling." He lifted his leg and swung onto a heavy motorbike, and the engine roared the length of the long street. Sitting behind him was Sienna Rhodes, one fingertip sweeping along the arch of her brow, her smile radiant. "Bye-bye, sister-in-law." I stood there in the fading light of late spring and watched the bike tear away, the girl's skirt streaming out behind her like a single flower thrown loose in the wind. Sienna Rhodes had chased after Ryder for years. Now that, truly, was a deep and faithful love. The Sterling heir was never short of scandals. But in the very days when my mother lay dying, he'd taken a girl off to hunt in Africa. A man who lives for pleasure has no heart. I watched it, quiet, and the cold went all the way to my bones. When the car door opened, a faint citrus scent drifted in on the breeze, just enough to sweep away the smell of smoke that clung to him. I didn't lift my head, but I couldn't ignore the way his gaze was fixed on my face. After that phone call, the causeless anger in his voice seemed to have eased. He spoke evenly. "Come with me to visit the grave tomorrow." My finger froze on the screen. "There's no need." "Angry?" He drew the word out. I looked up and met his searching eyes, and on my calm face there wasn't a trace of anything defined. "I simply don't see the point." I switched off the screen. What's missed is missed. Once the moment is past, there's no amount of making up for it that means anything. Ryder narrowed his eyes. "Who says there's no point?" He wasn't the kind of man who liked to argue. And yet now, of all times, he was digging in his heels with me. Ryder had always been the reckless, indifferent sort, rarely bothered by anything at all. I pressed my lips together. "As long as it makes you happy. No one's ever managed to stop you from doing what you want to do anyway." The next day, we went to the cemetery. Ryder caught my hand as I was unbuckling my seatbelt. "I'll go in on my own." I watched his back until it disappeared among the green trees. Ryder sometimes was a hard man to make sense of. His phone started ringing. He'd left it on the dashboard. I glanced over. Sienna Rhodes. I didn't answer, but she was relentless, calling one time after another, the ringing echoing through the whole car. It got to be too much, so I put in my earphones and closed my eyes to rest. I didn't notice Ryder coming back to the car. His cold fingertip brushed the edge of my ear. I opened my eyes and found him lifting the earphone out. Your phone's been ringing for a while, I explained on reflex. Ryder answered indifferently, his long fingers turning the earphone over and over. I couldn't read his mood, and I didn't know what else to say. The silence settled back into the car. Ryder took out his cigarette case, pulled one loose, set it to his lips. He opened the window but didn't light it. I remember. When I was little, I used to run over to your place to eat noodles. I turned to look at him fast. It was so strange, the sterling young master remembering something as small as a bowl of noodles. It made me think of my mother, and I said quietly, "Yeah, you ate 3 bowls every single time." Ryder frowned in distaste. "Not like you, so picky 2 strands of noodles is a whole meal." I pressed my lips together and couldn't argue the point. In those days, my mother really was a terrible cook. The one thing that could halfway pass for food was a plain bowl of scallion oil noodles, and I'd been sick to death of them since I was small. Every time I sat down at the table, I'd pray, quietly, that it wasn't noodles again. But Ryder had eaten them once and praised them to the skies, and it made my mother so happy that she started inviting him over all the time. And he never stood on ceremony. Every 3rd day he'd turn up until scallion oil noodles became a fixture in our house, and I got so tired of them I could barely swallow. Ryder reached out the window to tap off the ash, and there was a shadow of regret in his voice. And after that, I never got to eat them again. The grief of losing my mother welled back up. I looked out the window and didn't say anything. It struck me that Ryder and I hadn't shared an easy, gentle stretch of air like this one in a very long time. Maybe it was because he'd missed my mother's funeral that he'd set aside, for the moment, his usual arrogance. The phone on the dashboard rang again, shattering that rare, quiet moment. Ryder settled into the driver's seat, pressed the phone to his ear, one hand on the wheel. The car had barely started to move when the speaker cut in with that clear, familiar female voice, and she was furious, demanding an answer with no restraint at all. "Ryder, where the hell did you disappear to?" His phone had synced to the car's Bluetooth. He'd forgotten to switch it to private, and it was Sienna Rhodes on the line, and he had no intention of hiding it. He answered lazily, "Where are you?" She named a hotel, and her voice quickly turned aggrieved. "I've been flying more than 10 hours. I'm exhausted." So, Sienna Rhodes was back. I put my earphones in again and turned the volume down as low as it would go. The call ended fast. Ryder glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his lips moving. I read the shape of them and guessed he was asking whether to go home. I answered with my eyes closed. Ryder stamped down on the gas and the car lurched forward. Before I could brace, my body pitched ahead with emotion, and I opened my eyes in alarm. In the mirror, Ryder's arrogant face was reflected back at me, plain as day. He was watching the road ahead, the corner of his mouth curled up in pure provocation. What a rotten piece of work. He dropped me at the gate, then swung the car around and vanished at the far end of the road. I stood still a while, then turned and went inside. These last few days I'd quietly laid my mother to rest, but in the deep, still hours of the night the grief tormented me, working its way through my whole body like fine strands of thread, and there was nowhere to escape it. Before, even though my mother had been ill for years and living in a nursing home, at least I'd had somewhere to go. Now wherever I went, no place could be called home. This house, wide and lavish, had long since become nothing but a gilded cage. Since I was a girl, I'd set my alarm for 6, and I still did. Maybe I'd cried somewhere in a long dream, because the tear tracks had dried tight at the corners of my eyes. I sat there a while, letting the tangle of feelings settle, then stood up. When I saw the figure through the window, my step froze on the stairs. The long spring night, the dim light sliced into shards of dark and pale by the tree shadows outside, all of it falling across him. He'd only just woken and was still in his sleep clothes. "What's with that look?" Ryder tilted his head, thoroughly amused. I walked to the bar and poured myself a glass of warm water and said, calmly, "That would be thanks to you for not coming home last night." He seemed a little surprised. What, was I supposed to have stayed the night at a hotel with somebody else? Ryder curved his mouth, a wicked light in his eyes. "Why, Mrs. Sterling, are you planning to catch me in the act?" 500 just taken a mouthful of water, and it nearly went down the wrong way. For all his recklessness, Ryder had never actually crossed that line. But the bad blood he'd built up over the years always found its way into the papers as some sensational headline. And I, Mrs. Sterling, became the joke, and everyone was free to curse me at their leisure, and the Sterlings never once stood on my side. I knew that every time I turned up at one of his party spots, it grated on him. But what else could I do? As long as I carried the Sterling name, I was bound to clean up the trash he left behind. I have no such intention. I swallowed the water and felt bitterness spread across my whole mouth and reminded him, "You'd do best to be discreet. Don't get yourself photographed." Ryder narrowed his eyes, smoke curling hazily around him. "Sorry, today I feel like flaunting it again." I didn't answer. I finished the glass of water and went out for my morning run, the way I always did. After I'd worked out and washed and changed, I ran into Ryder in the garage, on his way to the company. He frowned. "Audrey Delaney, the company gives bereavement leave, you know." "I know." I nodded. 15 days. Today's the last of them. Ryder lowered his eyes and glanced at me, then, without warning, bent down and laid his hand on my shoulder, his fingers stroking lightly, a tingling, ticklish sensation spreading up from the touch. I brushed his hand away. "It's late." Ryder curved his mouth into a smile. "For the Sterlings to end up with a wife like you, truly. The ancestors' graves must be smoking with luck." I couldn't be bothered with his backhanded compliment. I drove out of the garage. I hadn't gotten far when a blue sports car came screaming past. Ryder braced a hand on his window and vanished into the flow of traffic. I gripped the wheel and frowned slightly. Did he think the public road was a racetrack? After more than 10 days pent up, the moment I got to the office, I buried myself in a stack of documents. Bethany poked her head in. "Vice President Delaney, President Sterling would like you to come by his office." I was fairly sure it was nothing good. Even braced for it, though. When I opened the door and walked in, I still felt a stab of unease. Ryder was slouched lazily in a chair. In front of the long desk sat a girl with her legs crossed, swinging her pale, bare feet with total abandon. Her back was to me, but from that loud, brazen outfit, I could guess who she was. It had to be Sienna Rhodes. I looked over at Ryder. "You wanted me." He lifted his chin a fraction, arrogant. "Look, your wife's here." Just from the way he said it, calling me his wife on purpose to needle me, my head had already started to ache. Here came the trouble again. I hadn't imagined Sienna Rhodes would actually make good on her word and come to find me. Sienna Rhodes turned around, and her gaze swept me head to foot without a shred of restraint. "Sister-in-law, we meet again." She was beaming, not the least bit awkward, as if the man she was sitting beside were her own husband. And all at once I found it funny. In the past, every time I saw her, something in me had twisted, because I'd believed Ryder actually felt something for her, that she was unlike the other girls. But seeing her now, all I could feel was that Sienna Rhodes was no different from any of the other women who'd been at his side. Maybe it was my own heart that had changed. "Hello," I answered, courteous but distant. Sienna Rhodes swiveled around to sit properly and propped her chin on her knee. 5 years now. Sister-in-law really has grown into a proper career woman." She winked, sly. "I hear everyone calls you Vice President Delaney these days." The implication was plain enough, that I'd climbed into the position on Ryder's back. I smiled faintly. "Through the back door, yes." She clearly hadn't expected me to own it so bluntly. It left her stunned. A low laugh rolled out of Ryder's throat. He leaned back in his chair, chin resting on his hand, watching me with open interest. I dropped my eyes. I didn't want to look into that gaze. Ryder. Sienna Rhodes couldn't smile anymore. I did not use the back door to get into your company. Ryder curled his lip lazily. But you're not Mrs. Sterling either. Sienna Rhodes choked on that for a moment. Whose side are you actually on? Ryder gave a thin, cold smile and didn't bother to answer. Ryder, she pressed. What was she doing that was any better? He drew out a cigarette and set it to his lips. Rooted to a bar all night, sleeping it off all day, and she still meant to come and work? Sienna Rhodes pouted. Then just come home earlier. Why not sleep in the bar and save yourself the trouble? Are you mocking me? The two of them went at it like that, right in front of me, forgetting entirely that I was there. I spoke up, flat and mild. President Sterling, if there's nothing else, I'll get back to work. Ryder shot me a glance, the look in his eyes half a smile and half not. I turned to leave, but Sienna Rhodes wasn't about to let me off so easily. Hey, don't rush off. Seeing that I hadn't stopped, she hopped down off the desk and chased after me. Sister-in-law. Her voice came from behind me, light and edged with laughter. I tilted my head a little. Was there something else? She'd already thrown Ryder's world into an uproar, thrown him off balance, even gotten him to call me in front of her, and it still wasn't enough? Nothing much. Sienna Rhodes tugged the corner of her mouth up. I only wanted to let you know. All those days Ryder was in Africa, he was with me. I thought, privately, that this sort of talk sounded awfully familiar. I remembered one day, not long after the wedding, when I'd gotten a message out of nowhere from an international number. Sometimes it was short and cold. Ryder spent 4 years in London with me. What are you to him? Sometimes it went on and on. I'd read them over and over in the night. Time has passed, and I don't remember clearly anymore what I felt back then. I only remember my heart hurt, like it had been cut open. I never replied. And now, strangely, I felt perfectly calm. What was I, a childhood sweetheart? A contract wife? I nodded, unruffled. Yeah, I know. And that doesn't make you angry, sister-in-law? No. I understood it all too well, and I answered her. That's just how marriages between these families work. It's a matter of interest either way. Who'd be foolish enough to actually put their heart into it? The meaning was clear enough. I was only a tool in this marriage, and the one Ryder truly had feelings for was Sienna Rhodes. In an age that exalts love, that says only those with real feeling have earned the right to become the third person, I, the one who'd come first, had somehow ended up the third person in someone else's love story. It really was funny. I gave a soft laugh. You're right. The smile on Sienna Rhodes's face went stiff. She'd been working so hard to needle and provoke me, but it was like driving her fist into soft cotton. No resistance at all, and it only made her angrier. I didn't say anything more. I turned and went back to my work. Early Saturday morning, Ryder still hadn't come home. I picked up my phone and sent him a few lines. 10 o'clock. Meet me at the gate of the old house. We'd put on a show of being a loving couple arriving together. As usual, Ryder didn't reply, but at least he wasn't the sort to leave me standing there. I arrived on time, and I hadn't been waiting long before his car came racing up. In the passenger seat sat Sienna Rhodes, and today she was the complete opposite of her usual wildness, dressed soft and demure as a proper young lady from a good family. As the car swept past, she waved. Good morning, sister-in-law. I hadn't thought Ryder could be shameless enough to bring her openly to the Sterling home. Since the old master passed, the rest of the family had learned to look the other way at Ryder's messes out in the world. But the elders of the household, and above all the strict branch of the family that guarded its good name, would never tolerate a thing like this. Ryder strode in with his long steps. I didn't hurry to follow, Behind me, Sienna Rhodes came running after with a bag of gift boxes. "Sister-in-law, help me look these over, would you? See whether his family will like them." I couldn't be bothered to answer and walked straight into the house. She still wouldn't let it go. "I hear his parents aren't too fond of you. What do you think? Will they like me?" At that, I slowed my steps a little and let my eyes travel over her, head to toe. Sienna Rhodes smiled brightly and waited for my answer. I only tugged my mouth into a faint, unhurried smile, said nothing, and kept walking. She seemed to take it as a challenge, and, unwilling to be left behind, she hurried ahead to lead the way. Ryder's mother came down the stairs in a silk shawl, every inch the noblewoman. She saw Sienna Rhodes out in front, then flicked a glance at Ryder, who sat at ease on the sofa toying with a teacup, and she understood at once what was going on. I dropped my eyes and stayed silent, as if none of it had a thing to do with me. Sienna Rhodes beamed. "Auntie, I'm Sienna Rhodes. It's our first time meeting. I brought a few small gifts, I hope." "They really are quite small." The sterling lady cut her off, her voice cold. Sienna Rhodes's smile locked in place. "Today is a family dinner. We don't receive outside guests." She turned to the butler. "See the guest out." "Yes, madam." The butler raised a hand. "This way, Miss Rhodes." Sienna Rhodes clearly hadn't expected to be dealt such a humiliating hand. She stood there flustered, her face gone white, and in her panic she called out, "Ryder!" Ryder sat where he was, legs stretched out, eyes lowered to the teacup in his hands, and he didn't lift his lashes so much as a fraction. And I felt, suddenly, a kind of pity for her. To love a man like Ryder, his favor is a flower in a mirror, a moon on the water, bewitching enough to lose yourself in, so long as you believe it's real. Sienna Rhodes walked out with the glitter of wrong tears in her eyes. The family dinner didn't so much as ripple over her coming or her going. Only old Grandma Sterling lifted her cane and cracked it down across Ryder's arm. "Rein yourself in a little, would you? Still bringing home this sort of riffraff. It's an eyesore." Ryder slouched back at his leisure, his voice lazy. "Grandma, you're wronging me. She came all on her own. Could I have stopped her?" "You most certainly could have." "Really?" He laughed. "You'd have had me raise a hand to somebody's daughter?" Grandma couldn't be bothered to keep sparring with him. She only shot him a glare, then turned and waved to me, gentle now. "Audrey, come here and sit by me." Perhaps this time Ryder really had gone too far, and she wanted to soothe me with a few words. I did as I was told, and played my part as the polite, well-mannered granddaughter-in-law. She talked for a while, then turned to Ryder, her tone suddenly serious. "You'll rein in that temper of yours, too. Married nearly 5 years now. How is there still no sign of any children?" The way she said it, Ryder answered in that same slack, careless drawl, "You make it sound like the second I straighten up, she'll turn right around and give me a child." The space between my brows twitched. Ryder threw a lazy look my way, and it carried both teasing and dare. Before Grandma could swing the point of it around to me, I stood up calmly. "Grandma, I'll just step out to the restroom." I deliberately dawdled a long while before making my way back to the living room. The thick carpet ran across the whole floor, and my footsteps fell without a sound. Grandma was still talking to Ryder. "Audrey is a fine girl. Don't you let her slip through your fingers." Ryder drew the words out, mocking. "A fine girl ought to marry a fine man. Marrying me is a waste of her." "Good that you know it," Grandma said, blunt and unsparing. "If you go on giving your heart to some cold, careless thing, then it's no wonder at all if you lose your wife." At that, Ryder reached for the cigarette case on the table, stood, and walked out. I acted as if I'd heard none of it and quietly settled back down beside Grandma. It wasn't until evening, when Grandma had gone up to rest, that everyone finally began to leave, one after another. I drove myself home, and I didn't care whether Ryder had gone on ahead. A little way down the road, I saw in the rearview mirror that his car was still trailing behind me. He didn't hurry to overtake, he simply followed, quiet, the whole way back to the home the two of us shared. There was nothing to say to each other. Each of us saw to our own business. I went upstairs to wash. As I was drying my hair and stepping out of the bathroom, I was startled to find Ryder leaning against the wall in the room, the lights off, the dim glow filtering out through the frosted bathroom glass wrapped around his body. The collar of his sleep robe hung slightly open from the hollow of his throat down to his chest, every line of muscle thrown into sharp, insolent relief. I stood there, silent, and couldn't find a word. Something wrong? Why are you just standing there and, on top of that, listening in on the sound of the water? Ryder raised a brow, the desire in his eyes surging plain and unhidden. I gripped the towel in my hands. What is it? Ryder's throat moved, and a low laugh broke loose. He reached out and looped his arm around my neck, dipped his head, and stared fixedly into my eyes. You tell me. I turned my face from his gaze and didn't answer. His restless fingers slid up to lift the collar of my robe. You heard it today, too. His warm breath wound around my nape and my shoulder. He smiled, wicked, coaxing. Grandma said she's ready to hold a grandchild. Right as the cold started to rise in my chest, I shoved his hand away without warning. Ryder, don't push it. Ryder had always leaned on that excuse, a wife's duty to demand what he wanted openly, and he'd never once been refused. But hearing the cold refusal fall so suddenly from my mouth, the hand that had been laying claim to me stopped. He drew back from my body and looked down at me from above for a long, long moment. Then he sneered. Audrey Delaney, just how much longer do you intend to keep pretending? I pressed my lips together and gave him the truth. I don't want to pretend anymore. His eyes narrowed and the smile drained from his mouth, a chill settling into the depths of them. The two of us stood there, neither saying a word, the air stretched so tight it felt about to snap and blow apart. In the end, Ryder wheeled around without warning, slammed the door, and left. Drops of water still clung to my hands. Below, the supercar's engine tore into its savage roar. He'd gone. I quietly turned and stepped out onto the balcony. This 3-story villa had been a wedding gift, chosen personally by old grandfather Sterling for Ryder and me, set on the finest piece of ground along the Western River. From the balcony, you could take in the whole sweep of the water. And so, I stood there, looking out, the way I had on 100 nights before, letting the spring wind stream past and carry off strands of my hair and the last drops of water. The long, hushed road along the river, its blurred lights strung out into the distance, and the supercar a streak of light hurtling through the night, veering off into the emptiness ahead. A word rose up in my mind. Unbidden. Wrecker. That was exactly what Ryder was. Every time he was unhappy, he had to find something to break to let it out. Like at our wedding, when he abandoned me and went off to race. No one knew how far gone he was that day, driving as if his life were worth nothing at all. His friends panicked and called his father, and his father came in person to bring him home. Back then, old grandfather Sterling was still hale, and he truly had reached the end of his patience with this grandson. Ryder was beaten badly that time, and no one in the house dared step in to stop it. And Ryder, stubborn to the bone, knelt on the floor with his back held straight and never made a sound. He had never once bowed his head. In the end, I was the one who threw my arms around him and used my own body to block the old man's cane. He couldn't pull the blow in time, and it landed on my shoulder hard enough that a cry of pain escaped me, and I caught the dark, furious glare Ryder flung at me. Audrey Delaney, get out of here! The engine roared, circling back from far off. Ryder had burned off his rage at last, and finally he stopped. The car pulled over at the edge of the riverside road. I squinted and dimly made out a figure standing beside it, tall and solitary, stark against the still black of the night. He bent his head to light a cigarette. The flame flared and quickly died, leaving only a single red point flickering between his fingers. There had been so many quiet nights just like this one, when I'd carried every kind of feeling in me and watched the sight of his back going away. Now, looking at it again, I felt only an emptiness inside, not a single ripple left. Even the resentment I'd once held toward him over my mother's death had dissolved. In the end, there was nothing left at all. The 28th of March, a lucky day for weddings, and the anniversary of mine to Ryder. A marriage between great houses is a kind of unspoken pact, existing to dress up the dazzling round of social life. In the years before, the Sterlings had always thrown a grand party on this day, ceremonious as a festival for the upper crust. Ryder and I would play the loving husband and wife, so the tender storybook moments could be caught by the cameras of the press. Everyone knew the young master's marriage was kept alive purely by the public relations department at the heart of the Sterling Group. Every happy moment between Ryder and me was manufactured by them. The crowds online got to chase the latest of Ryder's love scandals and, at the same time, get force-fed images of this great house couple gazing at each other in bliss. By now they were probably choking on it. There were only a few days left before the 5th anniversary when the events team at Sterling headquarters called me. "Young Mrs. Sterling," a man's voice, polished and correct. "For your and President Sterling's 5th wedding anniversary, we've arranged everything exactly according to instructions. The full schedule has been sent to your email." I only listened and didn't answer. "As for the gift you wish to present to President Sterling, we'll prepare it precisely as requested." By now, I truly agreed with what Ryder always said. This marriage, from the first day to the last, had been a play, and Ryder and I were the leads. I smiled. "There's no need. I've already prepared it myself this year." "Of course." He hesitated, but in the end agreed. Before he hung up, he added, as if in passing, "You and President Sterling really are of one mind. Truly. He said the same thing this year, that he wanted to choose the gift himself." 2 hearts beating as one. I curled my lips into a smile and thought how absurd the whole thing was. For years now, the anniversary had been the one thing Ryder went out of his way to cooperate on. Under the flashbulbs, he'd carry out little intimate gestures that looked utterly offhand, yet were exactly calculated to send the press into a frenzy, nothing at all like the reckless playboy of the scandal shots. Between his brows, at the corners of his eyes, there'd be a tenderness that looked like helpless devotion. Only when he pulled me into his arms would his lips graze deliberately across my neck, his voice low and jeering. "Not a bad performance, Mrs. Sterling?" I'd hold my smile, my eyes brimming with feeling under the flashing lights. "Real and yet not real. Are you so sure you can tell whether I'm truly acting?" "Tisk." Ryder tightened his arm and forced me flat against his chest, laughing cruelly. "The sound of your heart breaking comes through a lot clearer than that deep, loving look in your eyes." My whole body went rigid. Ryder quietly bore down with force, too. The flashes went off everywhere, and we were like 2 caged animals, putting on a show of love while, under the surface, we clawed each other to pieces. We never once said the other's name. The party began at 8 in the evening. Bethany, on orders, led the styling team to the villa, the very house where Ryder and I had begun our marriage. From the makeup to the hair to the gown of the young Mrs. Sterling, everything was prepared down to the last flawless detail. Everything fitted perfectly to my station. I had no say in any of it. When I came downstairs, Ryder was already waiting. He leaned against the car, eyes lowered, idly playing with his phone. The suit, cut precisely to fit, set off his tall frame and lent him a cool, arrogant, careless kind of nobility. At the sound of my footsteps, he lifted his eyes. His gaze came to rest on me, but he said nothing. After that night, he and I hadn't seen each other for days. Even when we crossed paths at the company, I only gave him a courteous greeting, and Ryder answered coldly, faint as thin air. The two of us kept up a strange, quiet peace, unspoken and hard to name. "Let's go," I said evenly, and got into the car. Neither of us spoke another word. The dense silence spread through the whole car. When we got out, I took Ryder's arm on my own. He clearly hadn't expected me to move first. He looked at me. I looked toward the entrance of the party and put on the standard smile of the leading lady, the leading man, and leading lady who, of course, must walk onto the stage side by side. Without warning, Ryder gripped my hand hard, lacing all 10 fingers tight together, using just enough force to press our two palms flush against each other, no gap left between them. I lifted my head and met the deep, dark eyes. "Ryder, the whole family's waiting for us." The 5th anniversary celebration was even grander than any year before. On Ryder's arm, I greeted every guest with courtesy, dignified from start to finish, giving no one a single thing to fault. The cart bearing the cake rolled slowly into the great hall, carrying the party into its climax. Unlike the years before, Ryder didn't give a set of diamonds this time, none of those blazing red carpet stones. Those gifts had grown too familiar, too flashy, too easy for the press to seize on. This year's gift was a plain, unadorned violin. One look, and I knew this was no ordinary instrument. It had seen a long stretch of years, and yet it had been kept so carefully it looked as good as new, the kind of piece collectors chase. Ryder must have gone to no small trouble to track it down, so he still remembered the dream I'd had as a child. I brushed my fingers lightly across the strings. I haven't touched a violin in so long. I'm afraid I'd only do a disservice to something this precious. Ryder glanced at me, meaning layered in the look, and his voice dropped low and rough. "It's not too late." "Too late," I answered him in the silence of my own heart, and let nothing show on my face. I took the gift box from the staff member and handed it to Ryder. "This year's gift, I chose it myself." Not just the gift, the box too I'd picked out with my own hands, and tied a small, pretty red bow on top, a good match for the mood of an anniversary. Ryder looked down at it for a while, and seemed for a moment to feel something, and made as if to open it right there. I rose onto my toes and wound my arms around his neck and held him close, the way we had in the years before, when we'd embrace and murmur a few words into each other's ears on the anniversary. "Here's my advice," I whispered by his ear. "Don't open it now." Ryder stilled. My breath drifted across the rim of his ear. "President Sterling." I'm not going to act anymore. The moment those words left me, every speck of dust that had settled on my heart seemed all at once to be swept clean away. In that instant, I was no longer the young lady of the Delaney family, no longer the young Mrs. Sterling, no longer Ryder's wife. There was only me, only Audrey Delaney. Ryder's hand dropped, then suddenly clamped down around my waist. I laughed, a light, unburdened laugh. "Ryder, at last I can throw you away." The party went on, but Ryder had vanished, no one knew where. The scene of the leading man and leading lady had come to a full and proper close, and I calmly made my own exit. I like to think of myself as a girl who saw things through from beginning to end. To have married on a day like this, I ought to divorce at just the right moment, too. 5 full years, not a single day short, and not one moment more. Bethany drove, glancing now and then at the rearview mirror. President Sterling's car was still glued to us. I didn't even bother to look back. Don't mind him. But the road was crowded, and he was driving the way he was. If something happened, Bethany worried, just leave him be. I'd barely stepped inside the house when the roar of the sports car's engine came howling up behind me, and with it, the ear-splitting shriek of tires grinding against the road, ripping through the night. Ryder caught my wrist from behind, his grip fierce, the bones feeling as if they might be crushed. I didn't struggle. I only bore it in silence. Ryder's voice still carried that frightening, even calm, without a trace of feeling in it. This was the telltale sign, the stillness right before a great storm breaks. "If you're asking me about the divorce papers," I said, my back to him, and answered him straight, "then yes, they're real." The pressure on my wrist slowly eased. Ryder let go. The air fell into a silence so heavy it choked. A few minutes later, Ryder gave a cold laugh, his tone gentle and yet soaked through with cruelty. "Audrey Delaney, and what right exactly do you have to ask for a divorce?" I turned my head and looked at him and, in the end, said nothing. If he said I had no right, then fine. I had no right. No lights were on in the house. Only a thin sliver of moonlight fell quietly in through the window. Ryder stood there, straight and rigid. His shadow stretched long across the floor beneath the moon, as if it had been trampled flat. It was clear he was furious to the very edge of his limit, and yet, mixed into his eyes, there was still a flicker of indifference and scorn. "Audrey Delaney, you married me for the alliance, to pay off debts, to atone for a sin, for every reason except loving me. Isn't that right? All these years you were the bridge for the Delaney family. You worked yourself to the bone for the Sterlings like an ox to repay a debt, to atone. You always bowed your head. You never once pushed back. And now that the debts are paid and the sins are washed clean, you want to kick me aside." He laughed softly, as if he'd just heard the most absurd thing in all the world. I blinked, and oddly, I found it a little funny myself. "Really, Ryder?" Ryder stopped laughing. He lowered his eyes and, slow and deliberate, began to tear the divorce papers clenched in his fist. It looked effortless, but his knuckles had already gone white with the force of it. I let him tear them and didn't try to stop him. Perhaps it was that very silence that drove him closer to madness. Ryder threw his hand up without warning, and the shreds of paper scattered through the air and drifted down over me, the sharp edges skimming across the skin of my face, leaving behind a faint, dim sting. I didn't move. I simply stood there and took his fury. The corner of Ryder's mouth curved into a smile cold as ice. "Audrey Delaney, don't you dare!" Ryder's rage finally broke loose completely. As he left, he drove his foot into the door and it slammed with a crash that echoed through the house, and he wheeled around and walked off and never once looked back. Bethany stood outside the door, clutching the violin, trembling. "Let me—" I gently brushed the last scraps of paper still clinging to me. "President Sterling, he—" Bethany had never seen Ryder like that. She was frightened until the color drained from her face. "It's all right. He won't be coming back," I said, to steady her, and pointed toward the bar. "Take whatever you'd like to drink. I'm going to go up and gather a few things. Wait for me here." "Yes." I took the violin and went upstairs. Everything I meant to bring with me had already been packed away, neat and ready, long before. When I picked up the album my mother had left behind, 2 photographs slipped out from inside it. I picked them up and looked closely, and my gaze went, for a moment, somewhere far away. The picture had been taken the year I was 5. I was in a spotless white princess dress, laughing so hard my eyes had curved into little crescents, and to my left and right stood 2 boys, alike as 2 castings from the same mold, and yet utterly opposite in spirit. One faced the camera with a gentle, soft smile. The other looked sullen and cold, the resentment written plain across his face. One was Simon, the other was Ryder. I held the photograph and looked at it for a long time, and recalling the things Ryder had once said, I felt, dimly, the cold claws of fate closing around us. For as long as I could remember, Ryder had liked me. My grandfather and old grandfather Sterling had been comrades in the war. The story went that if it hadn't been for my grandfather, old grandfather Sterling would likely have left his life on the battlefield. Because of it, the bond between the two families stood as solid as a mountain. When we were small, old grandfather Sterling had talked with my grandfather about arranging a betrothal between the two houses. Simon and Ryder were identical twins, which left the grown-ups unable to decide which one to choose. Grandfather Sterling had asked me, teasing, "Little one, which of these brothers do you like? Pick one, and I'll give him to you." I'd looked back and forth between the two boys, so exactly alike, agonizing, unable to choose, until at last I planted a kiss on Ryder's cheek. He flushed scarlet and scrubbed crossly at the spot where I'd kissed him. "Little pest," I'd pointed innocently at his cheek. "Big brother? Does it still hurt?" I'd kissed him only because I'd seen a scratch on his face. All my life the grown-ups had told me that if you got hurt, someone had to kiss it to make it heal faster. So I'd done the same. Ryder felt not the smallest gratitude. "I don't need you fussing over me," he'd said, and then, fierce, he'd warned me, "And don't you call me big brother." I burst out crying and threw myself into my mother's arms, while all the grown-ups around us doubled over laughing. And just like that, without anyone needing to spell it out, the betrothal was quietly settled. One look at how the two of us carried on together, and anyone could see it, a pair of natural-born adversaries. There's an old saying that adversaries thrown together in a narrow lane easily find themselves fated. But in the end, that saying only ever came half true. Ryder and I were indeed adversaries, just not the fated happy kind. From childhood, Ryder had been the ringleader of the local kids, forever at the head of a pack of little troublemakers turning the whole world upside down. He was always tormenting me. He'd roll himself around in the mud and then fling handfuls of it onto my princess dress, and I'd press my lips tight on the edge of tears, while he rolled on the ground laughing, a filthy little scrap of a boy laughing so hard you couldn't even find his teeth. Simon was the complete opposite. Afraid I'd cry, he'd always gently soothe me and walk me home to change. He kept candy in his pocket, and every time he handed it out, I'd always give Simon's to him first. He'd smile brightly and pass it along to Ryder, who'd only give a cold snort. "Who wants anything of yours?" In elementary school, I copied off Simon's homework, and Ryder, without the slightest hesitation, ratted me out to the teacher. I was made to stand in the corner as punishment, and when he passed by, he crowed with glee. "Serves you right." In middle school, I stood out in the yard and shouted at the top of my lungs, "Simon, you can do it." In the thick heat of summer, Ryder came running past, drenched in sweat, and shot me a glare. "Audrey Delaney, shut your mouth and let me study in peace." I was so scared I swallowed the "Ryder, you can do it" right back down my throat. In high school came all the confusion of those tangled adolescent years. A girl asked me to pass a love letter along to Ryder. I found it hard to bear, and I couldn't understand why. But the mere thought of someone writing Ryder a love letter left me feeling worse still. My whole life, everyone had told me that when I grew up, I'd marry Ryder, and so I'd grown high-handed about it, certain that Ryder had no business accepting anyone else's love letter. Simon saw how it was and gently turned it down on my behalf. "Ryder and Audrey have been betrothed since they were children. It wouldn't be proper for him to accept letters from others." And from then on, word spread all through the school that Ryder belonged to Audrey Delaney. Ryder was so furious he could have screamed. He knit his brows and dragged a finger across them, grumbling, "Audrey Delaney, you're really something." From that day on, no one dared send a love letter again, and Ryder, in a spirit of pure retaliation, threw the letters into the trash in front of the whole class. And after that, no one dared come anywhere near. He even declared, high-handed as ever, "This young master's admirers are all cut off now, and don't you go hoping for anyone of your own either." After that business, Ryder seemed to look at me with a little more favor, and it left me thoroughly bewildered. I once asked Simon, Do you think Ryder likes me? Simon smiled gently. Why do you ask? Because if he doesn't like me, then why would he marry me one day? I'd understood from very early on that to marry a man who doesn't love you is no different from a grave, a grand and glittering wedding that, in the end, buries a whole life, just like my mother and father. Simon went quiet for a long time, then asked, Do you truly like Ryder? I nodded. What is it about him that you like? I couldn't answer. The feelings of the young are always the hardest to put into words. If Simon was like a soft spring rain, gently nourishing all living things, then Ryder was a wild, untamed wind blowing across the open fields. And I wanted to walk out into that open field and chase after the wind. Simon sat in silence a long while, then lowered his eyes. Audrey, he really does like you. He paused, then gave a small laugh. He's just a childish little boy. I stared at him, dazed. If he likes me, then why is he always tormenting me? I truly couldn't make sense of the way a teenage boy showed that he liked someone. Simon kept his gaze fixed on the open book in front of him. Not everyone who likes someone knows how to show it. I had always trusted whatever Simon said, and because of it, my girl's heart gave a small, quiet tremble. One evening, at a party the Sterlings were hosting, I quietly slipped away from the crowd and tapped on the window of Ryder's room. He had that free, careless nature and couldn't stand parties like that, never once willing to sit and listen to the grown-ups drone on. That evening, he opened the window while still deep in a game, not even bothering to lift his head. Don't bother me. Ryder, do you like me? His hand jerked. The phone dropped to the floor, the screen flashing game over. I smiled at him, delighted. Your face is all red. Audrey Delaney. Ryder gritted his teeth. Are you even a girl? I am. Then damn it, have a little shame. I blinked. Answer me first. Ryder lost his patience, and stubborn to the last, gave a cold snort. Only a dog would like you. With a bang, he slammed the window shut. It felt as if my heart had shattered into pieces. I burrowed under the blankets and cried until it seemed heaven and earth might come apart. The love of the young is always fierce, and it aches all the way down into the heart. I stayed angry at Ryder that whole summer. The summer the college entrance results came out, Simon received his acceptance letter from one of the top schools in the country. I'd done well enough too, and with the bonus points from a violin prize, I got into a school in the same system. Ryder, meanwhile, took a beating from old grandfather Sterling. As a reward for Simon, the old man waved a generous hand and sent the whole group of us off to rest at a villa up in the mountains. With no grown-ups there to keep watch, we ran as wild as we pleased. It was the first time I'd ever really drunk alcohol, and it was awful. It went down the wrong way, and my face scrunched up, and the tears sprang out. Ryder raised a brow, his tone mocking. Show a little backbone? You call that drinking? None of your business. Grandpa can't be bothered to keep an eye on me. Bickering with Ryder actually lifted my mood a little. In a fit of pique, I drank a few more, and of course I ended up so drunk I couldn't tell heaven from earth. Amid the ear-splitting music, with the whole crowd worked up into a frenzy, I passed out cold. When the earthquake struck, I still hadn't come to. It all happened too fast. The ground heaved, the sky seemed to turn over, concrete and steel cracked and snapped with a roar that filled the air, and screams rose everywhere, chaos like something out of hell. Simon threw himself over me to shield me. I couldn't even react. I only glimpsed a roof beam crashing straight down onto the shoulder of that thin, slight boy. I don't know how long passed. When I came out of the blackness, the dark still lay over everything, not a single thread of light anywhere. My whole body ached, but I couldn't tell where the pain was coming from. I tried to move, and only then realized I was completely pinned, unable to shift at all. The thing pressing down on me wasn't concrete or steel. It was the still warm body of a boy. Simon. I couldn't move. The tears streamed out of me like a spring. For the first time in my life, I felt the breath of death that close. Something warm and thick and sticky slid down onto my neck. Blood. Simon's faint breath drifted against the crown of my head. "Audrey, don't cry." His voice was as light as a stir of wind. He was losing so much blood. I cried harder, terrified that he was going to die. I could feel plainly how much pain he was in, his body shaking beyond his power to still it. And yet, he still forced himself to smile and soothe me. "Don't be afraid, Ryder, he'll come and save us." He said that when the quake hit, Ryder was the only one not at the villa. He would surely come back. Ryder was the last light in their despair, and the two of us held on to that scrap of hope, suspended together on the very line between living and dying. In the pitch black, Simon said we absolutely must not fall asleep. And so we talked, on, without stopping. I don't remember anymore what all we said. I only remember Simon's voice growing weaker, growing smaller, until it was like a whisper carried from somewhere very far away. "If someday you're good to Ryder, then don't think of me anymore as just the one who carried the messages. Audrey, from now on, if you could choose all over again, I hope you'll live well." Simon didn't last until Ryder came back to save us. Of all those buried under the rubble that day, more than half lived, but not Simon. When the rescue teams arrived, everything was chaos. My mind was a haze. I couldn't even feel the pain. I only heard dimly a great many people talking, and the sound of Ryder weeping. That boy, sobbing in a way that tore straight through you. Grief rising like waves off the sea and swallowing the whole world. I think that day Ryder cried out every tear he would have for the rest of his life. From that day on, he lived recklessly, given over to it, and his eyes never once went red again. I lay in a coma at the hospital for a long time, and by the time I woke, I had already missed Simon's funeral. From then on, Ryder never once came to see me of his own will. It was only much later that I heard from old grandfather Sterling. Before he left, Ryder had knelt in the house for a long time and stubbornly said, "You're grieving the wrong one. The one who should have died that day was me." I would never know why. That night, Ryder had suddenly gotten up and left, and I never truly came to understand the meaning buried in Simon's last words. Once, the three of us had believed we would be together always. But then fate, like the wheel of a cart, ground everything beneath it and carried us off, each in a different direction. Simon stopped forever at the age of 18, and Ryder turned his back on home for good, 4 years, and never once a glance behind. I always felt I was in debt, and the guilt of it only grew heavier with the years. I resigned myself to wearing the chains fate had given me, living on among the cold ashes, and yet I did it willingly. A mistake there was no undoing, and the road of atonement stretched out into a long, endless journey. I realized then that the tears had already fallen. I wiped them quickly away, but they'd smeared across the photograph. I set the picture back into the album and packed my things with care. Just like my 27 years of life, in the end, there was only one thick album left to me. Truly, there was nothing that could be kept. The gifts Ryder had given me over the years now sat silent in the glass cabinet in the dressing room, glinting with a gleam of gold and gems, priceless and worthless all at once. The young prince had always been well practiced at spending money to buy a beauty's smile, wildly, without limit, and from start to finish, almost nothing of it had ever come from the heart. I set the violin down beside that glass cabinet. Of everything in it, Perhaps only this violin could count as holding a scrap of true feeling. Of all the things in that house, I took only my own clothes. The car had just turned off at the intersection when Bethany spoke up, hesitant. "It seems President Sterling has come back." I glanced into the rearview mirror. Sure enough, Ryder's car had braked at the gate, and he was striding inside. I drew my eyes back. "Let's go." The next day, I got a call from Ryder's father, and it wasn't a long one. "Come home this afternoon. I want to see you." The call ended, clipped and final. I held the phone and let out a soft breath. All the servants had been sent away. The house was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. I went up to the second floor, and in the hallway I saw Ryder standing motionless by the window. He was still in the clothes from the night before, the white shirt spattered and streaked with blood, painful to look at, both hands wrapped in bandages soaked through with red, a wretched sight. And yet there was nothing about him you could have called disheveled. Smoke drifted lazily at his fingertips, and his handsome face was cold, as if he'd just walked straight out of a storm. At the sound of my footsteps, he only cut a glance at me, then lowered his lashes and said nothing. I passed him quietly and pushed open the door to the study. Every one of the Sterling elders was there. The moment I stepped in, the conversation broke off. I greeted each of them by turn, as courtesy required. Grandma waved me over. "Audrey, come here to me. Tell me what happened. Why this sudden talk of divorce?" "Grandma, it isn't sudden." I poured her a cup of warm tea, the way I always did, gentle but unwavering. "You know I'm not the kind of person who'd say a thing like this on a whim." The tea had barely been poured, and it had already gone cold, and so had the heart. Grandma understood it perfectly well, but she still couldn't make herself accept it. "Truly no road left back?" "None." Afraid she was thinking about the division of property, I added. "Please don't worry, I won't take anything." "Oh, it isn't about money." She waved a hand. "Ryder has been a wretch these past few years, that's true, but you're childhood sweethearts, and you've been married all this while. An ordinary quarrel here and there that's only natural." I found it faintly absurd. Ryder could carry on however he liked, but as the heir of the Sterlings, blessed with a head for business beyond most men's, every fault of his was forgiven, and every last bit of his indulgence was tolerated to the hilt. Because I loved him, everything I did was wrong. Seeing me silent, Grandma began to play on my feelings. "I watched you grow up, child. You've been in this family a good few years now, gentle, sensible, always doing right by everyone. I truly can't bear to see it end this way." I lowered my eyes, my fingers turning without thought against my palm. Once, when no one had truly treasured me, there'd been none of this reluctance. Why the regret now? "Grandma, please take care of your health." That was all I said. I bowed deeply and turned to go. At that very moment, the door burst open. Ryder came striding in, his face cold as frost. He didn't look at me, but as he passed, he suddenly seized my wrist, the grip so hard it felt as if the bone would snap. No gentleness in it at all. I looked down at his hand. Blood was seeping again from the wound, soaking through the bandage. What he said wasn't meant for anyone else in the room, but every word of it struck straight against my heart. "Don't waste your effort. I will not divorce." His force was overwhelming and no one spoke. The whole room fell into a frightening silence. Ryder tugged his mouth into a smile, there and not there, but his voice went cold to the very bottom. "Not unless she's dead." That day, Ryder's father finally lost his temper until the color went out of his face. He snatched Grandma's cane and brought it down, blow after heavy blow, the sound landing like something striking bone and flesh. "Once, it was someone else who died in your place. Now you'd have someone die because of you. How did I raise you to turn out like this, you worthless wretch?" and I remembered all at once that on the day of the wedding, there had been a scene just like this one. The only difference was that then I had thrown myself in to take the blows for him. This time I didn't. Ryder leaned as if to shield me instead, his lips pressed tight. He didn't let out a single sound, and he didn't say one word begging for mercy. Ryder, I thought, was still the same headstrong boy he'd always been. Nothing had changed. In the end, his mother couldn't stand it any longer and threw her arms around her husband, pleading with him to stop. His father shouted, enraged, "Coddling him is destroying him. Go on and keep coddling him then and see what comes of it." Ryder pulled me out of that scene. At the door, I withdrew my hand from his wrist smeared with blood. I wanted to say something, then let it go. Both of us stayed silent, and there was only the heavy air. So thick it was hard to breathe. Ryder raised a hand to light a cigarette, but perhaps his hands hurt too much because they shook, and he couldn't get the flame steady. I looked at him for a few seconds, then picked up the lighter and lit it for him. The flame licked at the tip, but Ryder only held the cigarette loosely between his lips, his eyes never once leaving me. A long while later he breathed out the smoke, ground the cigarette out against his fingertip, and gave a thin, mocking laugh. "Audrey Delaney, do you truly not need me anymore?" I frowned slightly. He really was good at pointing the finger. If I tried to lay it all out plainly, it would only make everything more meaningless. I had no intention of defending myself, so I simply kept my silence. Ryder waited and waited, and when no answer came, it seemed to knock the wind out of him. His face dimmed considerably. He asked offhand, "Have you moved everything out?" I nodded. "Everything I needed, yes." He said nothing more. I couldn't read his mood. I knew perfectly well he wanted for nothing, and yet I made a point of stressing it. Apart from my personal things, I didn't take anything else. At that, Ryder let out a laugh full of mockery. "So that's the extent of what I meant to you?" "Not exactly," I answered, unruffled. I only wanted to cut every tie, to draw the line clean. Perhaps Ryder couldn't grasp what I was thinking, because his smile slowly faded and dissolved. "You didn't take anything with you?" He turned his face aside and tugged his mouth into a wry curve, his voice mingling bitterness with scorn. "And yet, I feel as if you've taken every last thing away." I chose a fine, clear day, bought flowers, and went to the cemetery to visit my mother and to visit Simon. My mother's grave was newly made, and after a few turns of wind and rain, the stone had already begun to gather green moss. Between heaven and earth, I thought, however deep and heavy the love, in the end, it all comes down to a lonely grave here and there. The living stand outside, the dead lie quiet within. And so it turns, on and on, until at last time smooths it all away, and love and hatred alike are struck through and wiped clean. So there's no need to keep carrying it in your heart, and no need to cling to it anymore. I stood there a long time, then took the flowers and crossed the cemetery to visit Simon. His grave was tended every year, and through all this time it had never taken on the mark of the passing years. Only the boy in the photograph stayed forever at 18. I'd come here countless times and told him so many things. The boy always smiled that same gentle smile, as if he were truly listening to every last thing I had to say. It was only that he could no longer untie the knots inside me, and no longer soothe my pain. I often thought about what kind of life Simon would have had, if he'd lived. Glory on his shoulders, a good wife and fine children, little grandchildren gathered around, a full and complete life. Someone as gentle and good as he was ought to have had every one of those things. But in this world, the hardest thing of all to foretell is a person's fate. That day, Ryder had asked me what I had to fight back with. What did I truly have to stand against any of it? The debt I carried, the pain I bore, none of it could be untangled. Simon, I've moved forward now. Do you blame me? I asked him softly. The wind blew past, then was gone. The boy stayed silent still, unable to answer. This was a farewell that had dragged on across all these years. I stood and brushed the dust from myself. Simon, I have to go now. I probably won't come again. In the end, we each have to walk on down our own road. As I left, I thought once more of Ryder and added quietly, from now on, I'm not going to listen to you anymore. I want Ryder to have a whole and happy ending. To hold gratitude is a good thing. It's only a pity the bond between us was thin, and the current of fate had already carried us far apart, each of us on our own small boat, adrift, with no telling where the tide might set us down, and little hope of ever coming ashore together. I stood there a long while before I finally turned to leave, and the moment I turned, I found Ryder's mother standing behind me. I froze, my whole body going still, my steps halting with it. She carried a box of pastries, and she set it down before Simon's grave with great care. I knew I'd find you here. There was no clear feeling in her voice, as if she were only saying something perfectly ordinary. I nodded quietly. She said nothing more, only took out a silk handkerchief and wiped Simon's portrait, though in truth I had already wiped it clean, not a speck of dust left on it. After a long stretch, she finally spoke. Whether it was foolishness on your part, or a matter of conscience. I looked up. She stroked the photograph gently. Simon was a very good child. He never once wished for anyone to have to live weighed down by guilt over his own kindness. My heart gave a small shudder. So she had known all of it, all along. That you didn't love Ryder that had nothing to do with Simon. She straightened and slowly folded the handkerchief. Ryder was wild from the time he was small, and we never once truly sat down and opened our hearts to him. So when he was forced to marry you, and couldn't reconcile himself to it, he threw himself into that reckless, dissolute life. As a mother, I hoped too that my own son would have a happy marriage. And so, with you, I have never once laid blame. I understand, I answered from the heart. I never blamed you either. She started down the mountain slope, and I followed quietly behind. I don't understand my own son. He truly does like you, likes you far, far too much. There was a note of remorse in her voice. And suddenly I remembered a great many things from those younger years. It's the way of every family, really. Everyone loves the more outstanding child a little more. Even a great clan like the Sterlings was no exception. Simon and Ryder were twins, and familial love had to be cut in two. And to love is to lean one way. Simon's brilliance drew every eye in the household, while Ryder, unruly and rebellious, was always the one overlooked, until, little by little, he grew wild and unmanageable. After Simon died, Ryder seemed to wake and took the whole weight of everyone's expectations onto his shoulders, and, apart from the chaos of his love life, he scarcely put a foot wrong anywhere else. Old Grandfather Sterling had once said the one who should have died that day was Ryder. And it struck me then that perhaps Ryder lived the way he did precisely because of the guilt he carried toward Simon. Ryder's mother sighed. That day I struck him. He was so angry he ran off to Africa to hunt. That was when I understood that this boy really is capable of doing something foolish. I thought of the photographs with Sienna Rhodes. In truth, it was hard to tell what was real and what wasn't. Perhaps the whole thing was one tangled knot. His mother seemed to read what was on my mind. More than anyone, he hopes you can set down that guilt. But because he believed you still cared for Simon, he chose the most foolish way there is to bring it all to an end. She couldn't hold back another sigh. On one side stood a woman fighting for her own release. On the other, A man like a child, eating candy all alone, longing for the girl beside him to pay him some attention. One moment making trouble, the next moment pitiful. In the end, as she said these things, this woman, once so lofty that no one had dared come near her, quietly lowered her voice as if she were pleading. Audrey, woman to woman, I understand. Once it's come this far, none of it can be undone. She paused, put on her sunglasses, and only then went on. But as a mother, I only hope you can give him a decent ending. The boy is terribly stubborn. Don't drive him into a corner with no way out. I heard the catch in her voice, and my own heart couldn't help but ache. After she left, I kept walking for a long, long time along the mountain road, and I found myself remembering so much and thinking again of Simon. Simon had always said, "Audrey, Ryder is a childish little boy." I thought his mother was right. Ryder had been that way since he was small. Brash and overbearing on the outside, soft and yielding within, too proud and too stubborn. And I thought to myself, if love is truly a thing that forgives, then perhaps two people who once loved each other can still find their way to forgiveness. I went home to find Ryder. He was sitting in my dressing room. Every one of the things he'd smashed had been mended one by one and set back in its place. I don't remember where I once heard it said that there's a deepest kind of helplessness. At the height of fury, you smash things to let it out, and then when you've calmed, you pick each piece back up and repair it. Ryder lifted his head to look at me, then bent again and silently went on with the work in his hands. The bandages on them were soaked through with old blood, filthy past bearing, and yet he showed not the slightest response to the pain. I couldn't tell what it was he was so stubbornly holding on to. I said nothing. I went downstairs for the medicine box, and when I came back I sat down in front of him and reached for his hand. He gave a small flinch, the faintest resistance. "Look at you, still so proud." Though I'd braced myself beforehand, when I peeled the bandage away, my heart shook violently all the same. "Does it hurt?" Ryder turned his face and looked at me and gave a snort. "Since when did you care whether I live or die?" It startled a laugh out of me. "Ryder, could you talk sense just for once?" Hearing me laugh, he turned back, and there was something complicated in the way he looked at me. All these years, it seems the two of us have never once really talked, not properly. As I carefully tended his wound, I gave a sad, quiet laugh. From when we were young all the way to our marriage, the thing between us had always hung in the balance, now close, now far, tangled together, and yet held apart. Part of it was our natures, and part of it was fate toying with us both. The two of us were like two planes gone out of control, hurtling toward destruction with no way to turn back. Ryder didn't deny it. He only stayed silent. My hands never stopped, and my voice was calm and gentle. "Ryder, I married you for the alliance, and out of guilt, but also because I loved you." He pulled his hand back all at once, the motion sharp and final. He plainly didn't believe me. "Don't move." I drew his hand back and curved my lips into a smile. "Have you forgotten? Back then, in London, you're the one who told me not to be greedy." He didn't answer. Love is too hard a thing to put into words. It only settles in the chest, aching and helpless all at once. Ryder tried to explain, but his voice caught in his throat. "I know," I said. "You've always been the sort to say one thing while your heart means another." I gently wiped away the fresh blood welling from his wound. But right at that moment, I was truly hurt. Perhaps Ryder had never understood. Those words of his, forever cutting against the grain of his own heart, didn't only wound other people. They were a kind of throwing himself away, too. And if that's so, then why, that day, did you stand in front of your father and say you didn't want to marry me? Why say it so easily? What did you imagine that would do to me? Ryder ground his teeth. And what about you? Have you forgotten Sienna Rhodes? So you really haven't. He raised his brows. I never once regarded her as anything. That day she chased after the motorcade on her own, and I never saw her again after that. It was the same in Africa. I don't even know how she found out I was there, and later, Ryder stopped and said no more. The first time I met Sienna Rhodes in London, I thought Ryder liked her, and it had grieved me deeply. But think about it, if he truly cared for someone else, and I stubbornly held on to him regardless, what meaning would there be left in a marriage like that? If he weren't happy, I could never be at peace either. And that was why I'd agreed to my father's words and ended the betrothal, and why I'd taken such a savage beating for it. Looking back on it now, I found it almost funny. I laughed. At first, I really was hurt, but afterward, I truly stopped caring. The arrogance between Ryder's brows seemed to collapse in an instant. My hands were gentle, my voice soft, and there was even a small smile on my face. All these years, the love I had for you was one long subtraction. Every time you did something insane, that love lost another piece of itself. And in the end, it came all the way back down to 0. Ryder's hand shot out on reflex and gripped mine tight, his lips gone pale, his throat dry, unable to force out a single word. I gently eased his hand away and went on binding the wound. You know it yourself. Whatever the reason, none of it can wipe out the hurt you dealt me across all those long, endless years. Headstrong and childish, he tormented me without end, over and over, and hurt me. Things that seemed so small and yet cut all the way to the bone. It wasn't that I'd never tried. It was only after so many times with my eyes gone red, after so many sleepless nights spent aching, that I had finally been able to let go. Ryder, you tell me what actually counts as love? I don't even know how to give you the right answer. Does it start at 17? The first time I knocked on your window? Or is it the 100-odd plane tickets back and forth to London across 4 years, just because I missed you? Is it from the time you said you wanted a bowl of my mother's noodles, and I flew 10,000 miles just to cook you one bowl? Or every time I went looking for you in a bar, my eyes red, and still tried my hardest to bring you home? There was so much of it I didn't even know where the telling should begin. The word love I had never once spoken aloud. But the things I'd done for him, I had done 1,000 times over. It was only that he'd never seen them or had chosen, on purpose, not to. Ryder turned his head away and didn't dare look at me. Even his fingertips were trembling. I smiled at him, all forgiveness. I know these are things you don't want to hear because you've known all along. How could you not have felt my love? You only clung, stubborn, to the belief that everything I did was for the name of Mrs. Sterling. All these years you kept asking, over and over, aren't you tired of putting on this act? Then how was I supposed to prove to you that none of it was ever an act? You seem to have forgotten even if I'd done nothing at all. Your grandfather would still have had us marry. That betrothal was a promise made between your grandfather and mine. Looking back now, perhaps that betrothal had been a curse from the very beginning. Ryder and I were both bound fast inside it, and no matter how hard either of us struggled, everything was thrown into doubt. Was it duty, or was it love? Perhaps I too had once misread it all. In those years, tied down by the Delaney clan, my mother bedridden for so long, the debt owed to Simon wearing me to nothing, the harder Ryder pushed me, the more I wanted to push back. And so, what had been gratitude turned into distance. Ryder lifted his eyes to me, the rims gone red. Audrey, do you believe me? I truly never once cared for anyone else. For more than 20 years, the two of us were never apart. It was only later that we began to lose each other. He had always drawn a boundless confidence from those childhood memories, from the bond forged when we were small, from the betrothal that meant I couldn't go anywhere, from the endless well of my forbearance. But he'd forgotten that Audrey Delaney was a person of her own. My heart wasn't built of concrete and steel. It felt pain, too, so much pain that all I wanted at times was for it to stop beating altogether. But I've let go now. I gently tied off the last of the bandage, and just as I stood, Ryder suddenly caught me in his arms and buried his head in the hollow of my neck. Drop after cold drop soaked through my clothes. His voice came against my ear, blurred and choked. "No matter what I do, you'll still leave. Won't you?" I whispered to him. "Ryder, I want to go back to being Audrey Delaney. The world is so much wider than anything we ever saw. Why stay trapped forever inside the cocoon of the old days?" Ryder had always wanted me to break free of the cage. It was only that today, when I truly broke free, he was the one who lost himself. He let his arms fall and bowed his head, no longer daring to let me see his eyes. "All right." His voice was hoarse, his lashes trembling. "You were always meant to be Audrey Delaney." I knew that this time he wouldn't try to hold me back again. On the first day of autumn, Ryder called me, and we agreed to meet at the registry office. He arrived late, right as the working day was nearly over. We hadn't seen each other in almost 3 months, and he seemed a little changed. There was still that careless indifference at the corners of his eyes, but in those long, narrow eyes, there was now something calmer. Something reined in. He tugged his mouth up, lazy. "You've gotten thin." His gaze was sharp. In truth, I hadn't lost much weight at all, and yet one glance was all it took for him to see it. "They're about to close," I reminded him, hurrying. "Are they?" Ryder drew his gaze back and didn't waste a single extra word. The clerk got ready to press the seal onto the divorce certificate. Ryder leaned in, half his body screened behind me, in a posture like a man gently gathering a woman into his arms. And yet he held himself in check and never actually touched me. The scene was so strangely familiar that I couldn't help but think back to the day we'd gone to register our marriage. Back then, the two of us had only just graduated, and it was old Grandfather Sterling who'd personally brought us to the registry office. Ryder, unwilling, had even warned me in the car. "Audrey Delaney, think it through carefully. Don't come to regret it later." I hadn't said a word. I'd only nodded, firm. When it came time to take the wedding photo, my palms were slick with nervous sweat, and my face was stiff as a board. We took it over and over, and the photographer still wasn't satisfied. Ryder, mischievous, kept running a finger down my back. "Nervous?" And right as the camera flashed, he swept an arm around my waist. "Smile, wife." I went rigid all over, my face flushing scarlet on the spot, and the photographer beamed until his eyes crinkled. There it is now, that's the look a bride should have. That photo was later printed on our marriage certificate. Ryder raised a brow and gave a soft laugh, and I leaned lightly against his shoulder, the shyness showing plain at the corners of my eyes. Anyone who looked at that picture would have thought Ryder hadn't been forced into any of it. Anyone would have believed we were newlyweds drowning in love. And now, in the moment of receiving the divorce certificate, he was thinking back to that day too, that cocky laugh sounding by my ear. "Wife!" I knit my brows hard. "It isn't even stamped yet." "Calling you that is hardly wrong then," he said, and gave an innocent shrug. The final seal came down with a clack. Ryder sat up straight and took the 2 booklets, one red, one green in hand, and, without so much as a glance at them, walked out. Outside the registry office, he invited me to a farewell meal. I checked the time, still enough of it. "My treat, then. I paid for the wedding meal, so I'll pay for the divorce meal, too." I led him through a small alley to a little shop with a narrow storefront, its low wooden tables old and worn, its red plastic stools chipped and peeling. "Sit," I said. Ryder stood there and didn't move. Are you really this stingy? I reminded him. The day we went to register our marriage, you brought me here too. I'd always been stubborn about one thing. However, something begins. That's how it ought to end. Ryder scratched at his brow. Now, that does sound familiar. He sat down. The table was far too low, and he was tall, all long legs with nowhere to put them. So in the end, he had to stretch them straight out under the table. Beneath that little table, the man's long legs took on a distinctly encroaching quality, and the fabric of his trousers brushed lightly against my ankle. I drew back a little and half regretted having brought him here. The shop owner greeted us with a warm smile. It's been ages since I saw the two of you come in together. It has been a few years, I nodded. The day we'd registered our marriage, Ryder had said, "Wife, let's go have a celebration meal." Those two words, wife, in that lazy tone of his, so hard to tell true from false, and he'd brought me to this very shop. Seeing the red booklet sitting on the table, the owner kept on offering her congratulations. Ryder didn't seem particularly interested, but there was a soft, quiet smile at the bottom of his eyes. When he paid, he deliberately left a little extra, the corner of his mouth curving. "Consider it the wedding candy." "You've been married a good few years now, haven't you? How is there still no child?" the shop owner asked, warm and far too eager. Ryder curled his lips, the smile full of hidden meaning, and said nothing. I answered plainly. "We just got divorced." The owner was so startled she was struck dumb and didn't dare ask another thing. She hurried to change the subject. "Same order as always?" "Yes." After the owner had gone, Ryder asked, "Have you ever come back here before?" "No," I answered without a moment's hesitation. In truth, I had. I just didn't want to admit how small and how weak I'd once been inside that marriage. When Ryder's scandals were splashed loud across everything and I had nowhere else to go, I only knew to come back to the place where he and I had eaten a bowl of noodles on our wedding day. Every time the sadness got to be too much, I'd sit right here and eat a bowl of hot noodles with my head down, telling myself the tears were only from the steam. Liar. Ryder tapped a finger against the edge of the table. "I know you came back." "How do you know?" Ryder didn't answer, only smiled and smiled, and I didn't press him. Some questions need no answer. Some people never needed one to begin with, and Ryder, I thought, was the second kind. Leaving the little shop, we walked through the winding twists of the small alley. Ryder said, out of nowhere, "This place is going to be torn down soon." There was a note of regret in his voice, and I remembered that Ryder was bound to this place even more deeply than I was. In 10th grade, he'd brought me here for the first time. We'd eaten 2 bowls of noodles, and while the owner was busy, he'd quietly left a thick stack of money and slipped away. A bowl of noodles and you leave that much money? Are you out of your mind? I hadn't understood at all. Ryder had clapped a hand over my mouth and half dragged, half carried me out of there. It was only later that I learned the owner's son had muscular atrophy, and she was running everywhere to scrape together the money for his treatment. And so, every time we came to eat, the two of us would leave a good deal of money behind and dash off. The owner had once chased us several streets over just to give it back. I used to think the reason I liked Ryder wasn't only the ache of longing for freedom, but because he was a stubborn one, cold on the surface and warm underneath. "Don't tell me you still think the owner is going to give the money back," I teased him on purpose, to break up the sorrow in the air. Ryder shot me a look. "You really would think that up." The two of us walked and teased each other, dredging up all the silly things we'd done as teenagers, laughing without a care. At the funniest part of it, Ryder said, half joking, half not, "If I'd known getting divorced could feel this easy, I'd have dragged you off to divorce me years ago. I looked down at the bluestone road beneath our feet and smiled faintly and didn't answer. At the mouth of the alley, Ryder took out the violin, carefully wrapped. Afraid I'd refuse, he curved his mouth into a lazy, teasing smile. I gave it to you. You've no reason to turn it down. I'm the one who proposed the divorce, and the papers are already signed. I reached out and took it. Thank you. How very polite of you. Ryder scratched his head. I still remember when you were 15. You said that someday you'd carry a violin out into the world and stand on the biggest stage there is. You even remember that? I laughed. In those years, no one was afraid of high mountains or wide seas. With your whole heart, you wanted to turn a dream into the bright moon hanging in the sky. It was only later that I learned this world is strewn everywhere with the broken shards of dreams that shattered. Ryder took a drag on his cigarette and watched me intently. Everything you ever said, I remember it all. I pretended not to catch the meaning underneath his words. The young Master Sterling has quite the memory. Of course, he bragged, raising his brows. For a moment it was as if the two of us had gone back more than 10 years. Ryder crossed his arms, the cigarette pinched between his fingers, and for a long while said nothing more. I noticed the faint scars crisscrossing the back of his left hand, and on his long ring finger, the wedding ring was still there. I caught my own gaze lingering too long, and Ryder followed it and said, slow and even, "Oh, the wedding ring." In truth, I hadn't meant to pay it any mind. I'd only glanced by accident and been caught at it, and not knowing what to say, kept my silence. Ryder bit down on the cigarette, his eyes gone sharp. I never promised I'd let you go, but I never said I wouldn't come chasing after you again either. I knew perfectly well it couldn't lead anywhere, so I only smiled. Give it a try then. Ryder drew a hard pull on the cigarette and let the white smoke dissolve into the dark of the night, arrogant and unhurried. Audrey Delaney, you might just find you can't hold up under my pursuit. Ryder does have every right to be arrogant. Right then, Bethany's call came through, perfectly timed. I turned to answer it and let it close out the subject of Ryder. You're here? Her voice came over the line, and down the road in the distance I could see the car with its hazard lights blinking. I see it. I tucked the phone into my bag and turned to Ryder. I have somewhere to be. I'll go on ahead. The drifting smoke blurred his figure. He only gave a small nod. I wanted to say a word of goodbye, then thought better of it, thought maybe it wasn't the right thing, and so I only said it silently, inside. Ryder, take care of yourself. Bethany's car couldn't sit parked too long. I hugged the violin to me and ran toward it. As the car pulled away, Ryder still stood where he was. The cigarette in his hand nearly burned to the end. He bent his head and lit a second one. I drew my gaze back and slowly closed my eyes. That night, I boarded a flight bound for somewhere far away. Somewhere in the middle of that long, long flight, on a whim, I opened the violin case and, to my surprise, found that besides the violin, there were two other things inside, a bank card and a peace amulet from a temple. The bank card had no password set on it. Likely no one could ever have guessed it, but likely, too, I would never have any need of it. I held the peace amulet and looked at it for a long time. On the front were the words, peace and smooth fortune. When I turned it over, two small lines were carved on the back. Audrey Delaney, Ryder Sterling. I looked at it quietly for a good while, then tucked both of them away into my bag. That night, 10,000 miles up in the middle of the sky, I had a dream. In the dream was that familiar road, dappled with the shadows of trees, still as peaceful and as long as ever. The light of the setting sun slanted through the leaves, warm and broken into patches. At the end of the road lay a blazing sea of orange. There was Ryder as a boy, lazy as always, his backpack slung crooked over one shoulder, and Simon as a boy, obedient, his backpack squared neatly on his back. I went running toward the two of them. "Wait for me." Simon turned and smiled gently. "Audrey, slow down. We'll wait for you." Ryder couldn't be bothered to turn his head, and when I caught up, he frowned in irritation. "Running like something's chasing you back from the grave." I pouted and complained to Simon. "Simon, he's bullying me again." "Don't mind that little kid." I turned and pulled a face at Ryder, and his frown only deepened. "Audrey Delaney, you dummy." He grabbed hold of my braid and went tearing off, and I chased after him, furious, with Simon walking behind us, laughing softly to himself. So it was that even a friendship as deep as ours had been in those long-ago years couldn't escape the day when each of us went our separate way. From here, across 10,000 miles of open water, there would be no day of meeting again. And so, Ryder, this is goodbye for real. No need to knit your brows. No need to grieve. Everything, in the end, will pass. Now here's how it all looked from Ryder's side. The truth is, Ryder knew perfectly well that that day, at the mouth of the little alley, was the last time he would ever see Audrey Delaney. She wasn't going to come back. Ryder left his car where it was and walked alone down the long street in the night. And as he walked, he remembered so many things. When he was very small, someone had pointed at some pretty little girl and teased him. "Someday she's going to be your bride." From that moment on, the name Audrey Delaney was bound fast to him, a match settled long before its time. He'd known from very early that he liked Audrey Delaney, and it was the kind of liking that everyone acknowledged, that everyone blessed, out in the open and beyond reproach. Childhood sweethearts, grown up side by side, come together into a perfect whole. He'd once thought he would give Audrey Delaney everything that was finest in the world. So how had it come to this? Ryder thought, if only, the summer of the college exams, Audrey Delaney hadn't gotten drunk. If only Simon hadn't stolen that kiss on her cheek then. If only, after Simon died, he hadn't found that quiet diary filled to the brim with love. If only, that night, he hadn't gone off in a sulk. If only the one buried under the rubble had been him, then maybe the one who died would have been him, and not Simon. And then Audrey Delaney would never have had to live all those long, endless years, drowning in guilt. Ryder thought that inside Audrey Delaney's guilt there was, perhaps, love mixed in too, and that was exactly why it weighed on her so heavily. When he was little, he'd heard the grown-ups joke, looking at the sort of girl Audrey was, "You know, her temperament might actually suit Simon better. What a shame if only she'd chosen Simon back then, how good that would have been." His heart had carried a scar over it for a long, long time. He'd always believed the living could never contend with the dead, least of all when the dead was his own twin brother. Ryder had always carried an obsession deep inside. His Audrey Delaney had to be a girl who was proud and yet a little soft, whose laugh was as bright as sunlight. She had to be a violin genius who stood on the stage with her whole body seeming to glow. He'd wanted to lead her out of the cage that fate had built for her, but he hadn't known where to begin. And so, childishly, he'd used the clumsiest, shallowest way there was. He'd faked being a playboy, drifting through one affair after another, to test her, to press her, to close in on her step by step and see whether she truly loved him, to see whether she could set down the shackles that bore the name of destiny, whether she could lay aside the guilt she carried over Simon. Those caught inside a thing are blind to it, and those outside can't say a word that helps. And so he'd gone on walking down that absurd road, farther and farther, until, at last, it seemed as if it had actually worked. Audrey Delaney really was free now. She had truly let him go. On the long, silent street, Ryder felt a sting rise in his eyes. The wind blew past, and his tears fell with it. He walked for a long, long time, as if he wanted to walk the whole of that road himself, alone. He knew Audrey Delaney wasn't going to come back, and he could never go looking for her again. In the end, Ryder remembered those 4 years in London. Audrey Delaney had come to find him once. That girl, who had never in her life done a single bold thing, had worn a skirt far too short and sat on the back of his bike. He'd tried, on purpose, to frighten her. "Stop sitting like that. If you fall off and die, you won't be pretty anymore." She, who feared being ugly more than anything in the world, had held tight to his waist that day. "If it's dying with you, then I'm not afraid." Ryder had thought once that that girl truly was a strange one. She didn't want to live together with him, and yet she was willing to die together with him. Thank you all for listening.